Welcome back to my review of A Conscious Universe by Armando Calvo. Yeah, we're still doing this. Chapter 3 is called We Are Human and Different.
The human man, the most advanced creature in all of existence, from our brains to our DNA.
Starting off strong. If he just said man, I'd think he meant human, but he specifically said the human man, so he means males. Any of you ladies watching want to sample the advanced DNA of this advanced brain specimen of a man, Armando Calvo? Yeah, I didn't think so.
The most abundant and widespread creatures in the universe.
What? Seriously, what world does this guy think he lives in? The main life sources are plants, animals, and humans. The main animals are lions, bears, and wolves. Humans learned to breathe and eat thousands of years after Jesus, and now we're the most abundant creatures. How is it even possible to be this unobservant of the world around you? It's like his entire understanding of reality is limited to what's visible at a 50-foot distance on whichever street of whichever city he lives in, just within his lifetime, and stuffed animals. It's incredible that he believes this invisible, intangible God stuff when he doesn't seem to believe anything that's not right up in his face in the real world. Like, how do you not know about bacteria? Or insects? Well, okay, the failure to notice bacteria is kind of excusable. After all, they're made of cells, and you can't expect a good Christian fellow to grant the evil atheist explanation for the origin of the universe, now can you? Nobody tell him animals are made of cells, okay? Anyway, he spends the rest of the page summarizing what the chapter's about, and you probably guessed already. Humans are super special, we can think and stuff, and that's why we're so dominant, and blah blah blah. Interestingly though, he says he's also going to discuss, quote, how our genetic information points to God. I'm curious to see how the genetic information of humans is uniquely special and shows that we're fundamentally different from all other life. That seems like a difficult hurdle, but I'm sure Armando's up to it. But we're not going to get to that right now, because for the next 4 pages, we're talking about the brain. Armando introduces the brain section with exactly what you'd expect him to open it with. The brain's complex. It does stuff. Who made it do the stuff? Those silly atheists think a bunch of random nonsense made it do the stuff. That's just a theory. A brain no. I'd probably take his assertions a bit more seriously and address them properly if what followed actually supported any of them in any way, instead of being just more obvious padding, and also if it weren't just 4 pages of deranged plagiarism. Even some of his introductory paragraph is plagiarized from Johns Hopkins, but that's nothing compared to what's coming.
Let's look at the 6 functions of the brain, called lobes.
Now, you might be confused why he's calling lobes brain functions and why he's saying there are only 6 functions of the brain. Lobes aren't functions, they're physical regions, and of course the brain does far more than 6 things. Well, I know exactly why he's said this like this, and I'll tell you in a few seconds. So this whole thing now is just listing off things the brain does and then tacking a description onto each one, most of which are stolen. And I hate to spoil what the point is, but you already know anyway that in the end he's just gonna say, see? The brain does things! Therefore God. Now his list starts, and there's a section for each lobe, followed by a list of functions of each lobe. Note that I've just said there are multiple functions listed for each lobe, 32 in total, and he failed to notice this when he said there are 6 functions of the brain, despite this starting immediately after him saying there are 6 functions of the brain, called lobes. He has frontal lobe functions, under which are attention and concentration, self-monitoring, organization, and so on, and then parietal lobe, with sense of touch, spatial perception, and so on, and then the same thing for brainstem, temporal lobe, cerebellum, lobe, and occipital lobe. So the question is, why did he think there were 6 functions called lobes? Well, because this random site he found says the brain is divided into main functional sections called lobes, and he didn't bother to note the very clear and major difference between functional section and function. What else is on this webpage, I wonder? Well, it has frontal lobe functions, under which are attention and concentration, self-monitoring, organization, and so on, and then parietal lobe, with sense of touch, spatial perception, and so on, and then the same thing for brainstem, temporal lobe, cerebellum, lobe, and occipital lobe. Well, it's pretty obvious where his list is from then. But this is only a list. It doesn't describe each brain function. So if you were Armando, and you wanted to pad out a few pages of your book by tediously describing each and every one of these brain functions for no apparent reason whatsoever, what would you do? Well, you'd copy each list item into Google, hoping to find something plagiarism-worthy. And without further ado, here we go. Attention and concentration. This one actually might be original. I'm not sure if he found anything plagiarism worthy for this because I didn't get any results and it's the kind of trite, feelsy nonsense Armando likes. So yeah, this might be original, although given his habits, I'm not willing to say it actually is. And that's a common experience I've had with this book. Sometimes he'll say something that sounds just a little bit too normal or that uses too big of a word, and I'll get suspicious and I'll search it and I'll find nothing. But with a chronic plagiarist, just because you didn't find the source doesn't mean there isn't one. Anyway, whether this is original or not doesn't change the fact that it's totally wrong. Attention and concentration in this context refers to functions that brains are capable of, but Armando doesn't understand context, and so instead he just gives us a description of what attentive minds are like. A focused mind, willing to learn, grow, and explore, taking in information and storing it away. A mental effort of direction. Now, that might be fine for a self-help book about how to concentrate better, which could easily be where it came from, but in this list, it's comically irrelevant. Self-monitoring. Well, that's plagiarized from Very Well Mind. Organization. Another possible original, and I say that because it's grammatically idiotic. And again, he fails to understand what the meaning of the word is in this context, and so he just talks about what an organized mind is like. Speaking, expressive language. He just gives the first definition of language from Google, which, aside from showing that he's yet again failed to understand the context, this also results in him using the word speech in the description of speaking. F for style. His description of motor planning and initiation is plagiarized from here. The description for awareness of abilities and limitations, again, might be original, because it sounds like a moron wrote it. He says that it means consciousness, awakeness, which of course it in no way does. This isn't even a failure to understand context. This is a failure to understand the actual words themselves. Awareness of abilities and limitations. This is about me knowing what I can and can't do, not me not currently being asleep. There's a second part to his description, which is the ability of knowing your limits as a human and the differences between you and other creatures. Okay, now we get the failure to understand context. The list is talking about awareness of your limitations in the sense of what you're not capable of doing, as established by the juxtaposition with abilities. But he's taken it to mean awareness either of where you end and another entity begins, or possibly of the limits, the borders, of the definition of human itself that establish a distinction between humans and non-humans. I'm not exactly sure which, it's a little hard to tell, but whichever one he means, it's radically different from the meaning intended by the author of the list. And bizarrely, it's even more radically different from his first attempt, consciousness, awakeness. He has two completely different definitions here, right after each other, as if that makes sense. I don't know what happened here, but I'm happy it did. The personality description is again probably original because it sounds dumb, but I do have a lot of trouble seeing Armando coming up with a phrase like unique set of traits. Who knows? Anyway, apparently personality traits are applied to an individual, I guess like a coat of paint. This seems similar to how the needs for air, water, light, and nutrients are applied to organisms by the universe, apparently. Just grab a can of personality and a can of needs from the hardware store and brush them on. It's easy! Mental flexibility is plagiarized from the first line of the Wikipedia article on cognitive flexibility, except that he changed it from being an intrinsic property of a cognitive system often associated with the mental ability to adjust its activity and content to the mental ability to adjust to different activities and content, thus entirely changing the meaning. The real definition is about the ability of a mind to change what it does internally, and Armando's altered definition is about the ability of a mind to adapt to external stimuli, such as different activities and different content, which I can only assume refers to YouTube videos. Again, we see his total failure to grasp context. The first sentence of the inhibition of behavior description is plagiarized from Very Well Mind. I'm not sure about the second sentence. In any case, we see another failure to grasp context. He didn't understand what inhibition of behavior refers to in the context of basic brain functions, and so he stole a description of an inhibited personality type instead. Somebody who's shy. The description for emotion sounds stupid, so it's probably original. Same with the one for problem solving. Planning in anticipation is just the first line of the Wikipedia page for planning. The one for judgment is the first dictionary definition that comes up on Google. The ability to make considered decisions or come to sensible conclusions. But he tacks on, most times looking to establish objective truth. He probably read that somewhere, I don't know where, but again he completely missed the context, which is judgment in the sense of acting with good judgment. The sense of touch description is from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, a site which Armando really has no business even clicking on until he gets basic reading comprehension nailed down. The page says, the sense of touch is one of the central forms of perceptual experience. But he chops off the first half of the sentence, including one of, and so he ends up with just sense of touch, the central forms of perceptual experience. You know, if you were going to elevate touch from one of the central forms of perceptual experience to the central form, you could have at least unpluralized forms. Yes, I know I'm asking a lot. Also, since we're talking about brain functions, it might have been a good idea to plagiarize a description of the sense of touch as a brain function, rather than a description of how touch physically works via receptors in the skin, which is completely irrelevant. The description for spatial perception is from the Wikipedia page for spatial ability, but amazingly, it's not from the first line. It's from several paragraphs down the page. Wow, is this improvement I'm seeing? No, not really. It's just under the spatial perception header. That's why he took this part. Oh well. The one for differentiation, identification of size, shapes, and colors might be original, since all he actually had to do for this one was copy what the list item already said. He couldn't even get that right though, because he changed size to 6. Visual perception comes from the first line of the Wikipedia page for visual perception, and just like with the sense of touch, we see him explaining how the process works external to the brain. In this case, talking about the light spectrum and types of vision under different light conditions, which concern the eye far more than the brain, instead of actually describing the brain function, which is the whole point of this entire list. Imagine being this incapable of the most simple recognition of context your entire life. Wow. His description of breathing is plagiarized from here, and again, he describes the physical process of breathing, lung, mouth, nose, muscle contraction, instead of the brain function. The description of arousal is probably original. Life, awake and awareness, which, aside from sounding like words pulled out of a hat, is most definitely not what is meant by arousal here. Is this extreme prudishness, or is he just massively missing the point again? He's missing the point, obviously. Attention and concentration is also possibly original. He's already defined this previously with the first item on the list, but by now he's forgotten all about that, and he's written something completely different here. The first half of the definition is irrelevant, but the second half is not well phrased, but at least relevant. Heart rate is, again, another possible original. Now, he was clearly working out a little bit in preparation for the army, so he could easily know the average range of resting heart rates without copying it from somewhere. Or he just looked it up but wrote the words himself, I don't know. But as usual, he misses the point, and he explains what your heart rate does for your heart, even though the topic is brain functions. The source of the sleep and wake cycles description is not entirely clear. The phrase, the sleep-wake cycle is a type of circadian rhythm, shows up in a lot of places, and the rest is even less clear. I think he probably assembled the second half of the sentence himself, maybe from different sources, and he's made it different enough that I can't find anything, so who knows? At this point, probably even he doesn't know. The description for memory is just the first Google dictionary definition, and despite directly copying it, he somehow missed the space between the and faculty. The description for understanding language might be original. The description for sequencing uses a fragment of the first line of the Wikipedia page on sequencing, as in genetic sequencing. Apparently the temporal lobe's responsible for determining the primary structure of unbranched polymers, if the full text he stole from is anything to go by. For some reason he just copies this tiny little bit of the sentence, doesn't even try to make it make sense as its own standalone sentence, and then doesn't even bother to put a period at the end. So not only does the original definition that he stole make no sense in this context, his clever editing made it make no sense even just as a collection of words. The description for hearing comes from the first line of Wikipedia on hearing, and as usual, by his complete inability to comprehend context, he's copied how the process works externally to the brain, in this case how how hearing physically works in the ear instead of talking about hearing as a brain function. The description for organization is nonsensical, and so probably original. This is another one he's already defined before, so why did he do it again completely differently here? Because he's not paying attention is why. Of course, he's completely missed the context and described it in a way that's in no way applicable. Also, I noticed something in some of his possibly original definitions. Organization 1, Organization 2, understanding language. He likes the word pattern. If I see the word pattern, I'm going to start thinking it might be original. So there's a tip for you, Armando. If you want to sneak plagiarism past me in the future, just copy whatever you're going to copy, and then scatter the word pattern through it at random. The description for balance is not original, but it could have come from any number of places, according to Google. Skilled motor activity is the first line of the Wikipedia page for motor skill. Coordination is just the first Google definition of coordination. Physical movement and activity is the first line from Wikipedia on physical activity. But what's remarkable about this one is he started writing his own thing. The place in the brain that... And then I guess he realized that he had no idea what to put next, and he just copied in the entire first line from Wikipedia. So it reads, the place in the brain that physical activity is defined as any voluntary bodily movement, and so on. He didn't care that this makes the sentence complete nonsense. He didn't even bother to change the P in physical to lowercase. This is not the first time he's done something like this. Remember that time in God Is? I got especially annoyed about it then. This is just how he prefers to write books. Or compile books, or whatever he's doing here. This is a choice he's made, more than once. I don't know how to express how confused that makes me. Finally, the description for vision is just the Google definition, and so he ends up just telling us what vision is, as if that were important or relevant to just about anything. Whatever, list done. What a ride that was. Somehow it's still not the worst example of plagiarism that we've seen from Armando so far, but it might be the most ambitious, just by the sheer number of different sources he had to find and steal from. This is about the only thing relating to writing that Armando seems to be ambitious about. And I mean ambitious like spending 2 hours in a row on something. I don't mean like actual ambition or, God forbid, effort.
Notice how all of these lobes describe attributes of a living, breathing, intelligent person.
Do they? Frontal lobe. That's an attribute of a person? Well, okay, I guess it is, in the sense that a person has a frontal lobe. It's an attribute of the person. But I'm pretty sure Armando means the brain functions, not the lobes. Although, even those, I'll bet, are not quite what Armando means by attributes.
This is important because it shows how structured, specific, and complex our brains are. There is absolutely no room to say that this was just a coincidence.
Yeah, you keep saying that people say stuff is just a coincidence. I don't recall anyone ever saying that the structure or complexity of the human brain is a coincidence. There's of course the problem that for there to be a coincidence at all, things have to coincide. But more importantly, your opponents, Armando, are not saying that the brain just kinda oopsied into existence. There wasn't a brain, or maybe it wasn't overly complex, and then there just was a big complex human brain, just because. That's stupid. It's not what anyone thinks, and you know it damn well, or at least you damn well should, given the number of times it's been explained to you. But then again, this is a guy who can't distinguish between hearing as an ear function and hearing as a brain function, so I'm probably expecting way too much here. I have a bad habit of expecting too much. My wife always makes fun of me for it.
These values came from a source which caused these results to be what they are. Have you ever questioned the attributes of the cause itself, or even the process of these results?
Well, I have no idea what these values or the process of these results are supposed to mean, because those words make no sense the way you use them, but the answer is yes. I've questioned it, which is why I hold the opinion on it that I do.
It is hard to refute the fact that these values only arose from a source that carries these attributes in itself. If not, you would then have to explain logically how these attributes could have just risen from completely nothing.
No, stop being stupid.
Or how they evolved into this extremely complex and incredible machine we call our brain.
Yes. If you want to understand the evolution of the brain, you'll need to try to logically explain the evolution of the brain, which is why when people try to understand the evolution of the brain, they do that. Why do you think that's not a thing? I guess for a similar reason to why you think humans are the most abundant organisms in the universe. Because all that exists to you is whatever happens to cross your half-aware gaze. You're sure as hell not going out of your way to notice anything.
But evolution is to assume that the process of evolving cells had a specific goal that had led this process in this intelligent and organized state.
No, that's creationism, you absolute dipshit. That's not evolution. You said this earlier in the book too, and it's not any more true now than it was then. It is so strange that you think you can convert people by lying endlessly about what they say. I'm not clear on how you expect that strategy to do anything but the opposite of what you want.
You would have to conclude that these attributes were a part of that engineering process, therefore making the cause an intelligent one.
So your brilliant plan here is to strawman evolution as being based on an assumption of a predefined goal and intelligent design, and then say, see, evolution assumes intelligent design. And the outcome is supposed to be what? That people eventually stop laughing at you and then just convert for no reason?
Now, we can duck and dodge the obvious all we want, but this seems to scream a creator extremely loud. There was clearly a goal that was trying to be achieved. But the question is, whose goal? Evolution? Quantum particles? The Big Bangs? The kaboom bing pow?
I believe that last one was supposed to be a joke of some kind. I'm not really sure why I think that, though.
To assume anything other than God is to completely destroy every bit of knowledge we so think we have.
I don't know what knowledge Almondo so thinks he has to destroy, or why assuming something other than God would destroy it, but apparently Almondo's serious enough about preserving it that he'll assume God based on the 0 good reasons presented so far in this chapter. Despite the length of what we've gone through so far, the only argument for God in this chapter so far is the brain does stuff, therefore God. Seriously, that's it. A multiple pages long God of the Gaps. But to be fair, for Almondo, God of the Gaps is top shelf stuff.
I think we should start using our brains the way they were designed to be used.
So your God designed our brains to be used like we grew up eating lead paint and getting thrown down the stairs daily? I don't even believe in the guy, but I'm a little offended on his behalf. Thankfully, on page 46, we're on to something that isn't the brain. That something is DNA. You know, the thing that apparently makes the human man more advanced than the human woman.
DNA is one of the most fascinating identities of a human being.
Armando, please do not tell me you identify as DNA gender after rightfully making fun of otherkin in Chapter 8.
Each one of our genetic codes differ from amongst each other. Our genetic code is what makes each and every one of us unique.
And suddenly he's writing like a tech support scammer.
Let's start off by looking at the 4 genetic codes of our DNA.
4 genetic codes. That's how he refers to nucleotide bases. More evidence that he has no clue what he's on about, as if we needed it. But then, strangely, he correctly calls them the 4 nucleotide bases. Weird, right? No, it's just more plagiarism. And then there's more plagiarism from here, and then a couple more sentences plagiarized from here. Strangely, these sentences repeat everything he already plagiarized just previously about there being 4 nucleotide bases, or letters, and 64 3-letter sequences that can be made from them. He's repeating himself, but he doesn't notice because he's too busy copy-pasting to actually read what he's stealing. It's amazing how clear it is throughout this entire book that Armando doesn't care at all what's actually in it, as long as he can say he has a book. Now he rambles for half a page, probably in his own words, about how complex DNA is, and so it must be designed, and you know the drill. Nothing new or interesting here. Then more plagiarism, this time from his idol, J. Warner Wallace at Cold Case Christianity, except that instead of the original's description of protein formation without DNA as a haphazard hit-or-miss proposal, Almondo describes it as a higgledy-piggledy. I never understand how his mind works, but it never ceases to fascinate me. At the start of page 47, he mentions God is. Why would he not just bury that piece of shit and move on? Well, probably because he has no idea how big of a piece of shit it is, and he hasn't learned a single lesson beyond maybe plagiarism's great, and I should do more of it.
Question: has information ever come from an unintelligent source? For example, a book.
An unintelligent source like a book? No, you mean information like a book. Okay. Well, this book technically contains information, and its source is most definitely unintelligent. So yes.
No! Books are created by minds and intelligent beings.
Yeah, I used to think that too. Anyway, his whole argument in this part is just, I don't understand stuff and I didn't bother to try. Therefore God. Whatever, next section. Which goes into different people act different, therefore God. Whoa.
It's interesting how something of a big bang or evolution could have developed beings with their own personal characteristics with specific traits and skills. Why is it that every human being is different and unique in their own individual way? How could an unintelligent random process of genetic mutation cause humans to develop in such a way that differentiates with one another for the purpose of uniqueness and individuality?
He poses the question and then answers it for himself in the next sentence. Now, I'm not saying his answer is fully correct, and it's certainly not complete, but the answer to why evolution doesn't produce identical clones is that each individual is subject to non-identical inputs. Not just genetic inputs, as Almondo implies. There's plenty enough, roughly speaking, randomness in the world that even if you take two genetically identical humans, their inputs, from experience or literally chemical inputs, are going to make them distinct. The fact that different people are different people, is the furthest thing from interesting. That is not some grand problem of evolution. In fact, it's pretty much the basis of it. What is interesting is the fact that apparently Almondo thinks that we should expect people to be perfectly identical clones, right down to having identical personalities. What feature of evolution, which is an idea based entirely on variation, has given him this idea that it should lead to a total lack of variation? Well, the answer, of course, is no feature, because Almondo doesn't have the first clue what the idea even is that he's arguing against.
Let's begin with discussing differences within each person.
He says this to preface 3 pages, explaining that different people are different people, as if his audience is not going to understand this perfectly well. Why wouldn't he just stop with what he's already said? That there are differences between people, so ooh, wow, God, or something. It's not like he's going to meaningfully add to that with all this rambling, so why not just stop there? Well, the same reason as always. Gotta pad out that book. His first difference is personal desires and goals, where he clarifies just how rigid his idea is that if evolution is true, then everyone should have identical personalities.
Interestingly enough, not every person, even with similar goals, has the same set of preferences. This actually makes a distinction among all other persons. This is big, because if Darwinian evolution is true and the cause of the universe was not only unintelligent but random, then we would have a recurrence of repetitive processes resulting in the same type of person. It would be no different than a repeating number format. 11111111.
So yeah, apparently in Almondo's world, randomness results in the same exact result every time, which is the opposite of randomness. It's the same as saying that if I roll random dice with a random shake onto a random surface, I'll get the same number every time. And apparently, he thinks that evolution, the idea that the variety of life is driven by the variety of individuals, means that there should be 0 variety between individuals. You know, I've seen lots of people fail miserably to understand evolution before, but I don't know that I've seen someone so consistently assume that the idea is the exact opposite of what it is. Apparently, this is the result of all those attempts to clarify for Almondo what ideas he's actually opposing. He's ended up literally as wrong as it's possible to be.
But can't we have different types arising from that one source? Yes, but all of the factors of that source would only be limited to the initial cause itself. If there is no mind or free will involved, then every effect is a result of one random effect that has no free will, desire, or intelligence.
Okay, so we're back to the usual claim that effects inherit properties directly from their causes, which he's never even slightly tried to support. The next difference between people is personalities, in which he long-windedly states that people have personality traits. What a revelation. That's all I have to say about that. The next one is fingerprints. Now, given the introduction to this section that was all about people having different personalities, I thought these differences between people would be about, personalities. But no, he's already used up that kind of difference, and he didn't get as much padding out of it as he wanted, so now we're also including physical differences. Did you know humans have physical differences? I bet you didn't. So let's hear the professor explain why you're a fucking idiot.
Fingerprints are your own unique mark that only you have and is not found in another person. It's almost as if it was intended to be this way and a confirmation of our individuality.
What's his justification for this? This is a book. He wrote a book. That means he's smarter than you. You didn't write a book, or at least not this book, so shut up and stop asking questions. He actually quotes, like cites and then quotes, the National Forensic Science Technology Center. Or actually, I'm pretty sure he got this from Healthline quoting them, but whatever, I'll take it. It's an actual quote, and he says who wrote it. Sometimes I think his plagiarism is just the result of him being an innocent idiot, but then he goes and does it more or less properly, and I'm reminded that he does understand the concept, he just doesn't give a shit most of the time. And therefore he has no excuse for the plagiarism-riddled disaster that is this book. His argument here is the same as the personality one. If there's no God, everyone should have identical fingerprints.
One big fact about this is that the National Forensic Science Technology Center states this: no two people have ever been found to have the same fingerprints, including identical twins. If that is true, then what is the explanation of this? Did the effect of the universe have many options to choose from before causing its own appearance? Was there a glitch in the Matrix? What is the explanation?
The explanation is that your completely unjustified assumption that an ultimate cause must share every feature of all of its effects, no matter how distant, right down to the fucking fingerprints, and that these effects must all be identical, is ludicrous and breaks down under the slightest questioning, like you've just demonstrated. That's the explanation. You know, Armando, something I don't think I've pointed out to you yet about this is that the whole idea of cause and effect is that effects are different from causes. The idea is that something happens, and as a result of that, something different happens. In fact, usually many different things happen, sometimes very different things, and these effects are different from the cause. They're not copies of it, they're effects of it. That's why we make a distinction between a cause and its effect. Your entire central idea crumbles just from remembering what the words cause and effect even mean. You also imply with this that a non-theistic origin of the universe means that all conditions in a womb must be perfectly equal during the growth of a baby, between all wombs, not just in the one, since variation in those conditions is the major factor in fingerprint differences. There appears to be no reason to assume this, and you haven't tried at all to justify it, so why are you using it as the basis for your argument? Well, 'cause whatever. Screw it, I guess. The next difference is genetics and physical characteristics.
No person in this world has ever been cloned identical to another individual. This seems to show the intelligence of creation through the vast abundance of unique and different human beings.
Why? You know why. Because he said so is why. Ugh. The final difference is intellect. This book is definitely giving me a new appreciation for the range of human intellect, especially the lower end. Here he gives us 3 fake statements from 3 fake people. A fake Christian, a fake atheist, and a fake agnostic. I'm just gonna show them here straight from the book, because I don't give a fuck at this point. If Captain Plagiarism has a problem with me showing whole pages of his book, he can sue me. The atheist is especially interesting, in the sense of being another example of Armando's complete and total lack of interest in accurate characterization of his opponents or their positions. Eat a dick, Armando. What's more interesting, though, is that this atheist, like the agnostic, actually does not believe in the existence of God. This despite Armando's repeated assertions in his videos that all atheists, and in fact all people, believe in God and are just lying about it. It'd be really nice if he'd settle on one straw man instead of just choosing a random one at every given moment, but maybe intellectual consistency is a product of intellectual ability, I don't know.
Intellectual thoughts and ideas come from the information we had received through research, rumors, claims, facts, and other areas of knowledge that we had been given or choose to accept. Every person has their own set of reasons as to why they believe what they believe. Some reasons may be similar, but the root of every person's reasoning may differ under certain circumstances. This is a part of our uniqueness, being able to accept or reject certain information that may contradict our feelings, thoughts, and/or opinions. Not every person was led to their conclusions in the same way. We all have a different story and perspective.
Damn, all of a sudden Armando's spitting facts. If it were a little more eloquent and written by a handsomer, spandexier-faced gentleman, it could pass for something I wrote. But there's a problem. See, if I wrote that, it'd be because I actually believe it. But I didn't write it. Armando wrote it. The guy who we've heard over and over right from the start insists that all atheists find his arguments compelling and believe in his God and lie and pretend otherwise, and that our positions are purely emotional and irrational, and that we're dishonest and demon-possessed, and we love sin and serve Satan and hate truth and so on. He wants us to think that he thinks that people are all individuals with our own motivations and reasons and experiences that lead us genuinely to very different positions. But it doesn't work, because he's demonstrated and more or less directly said many times that he does not believe it. Oh, maybe he believes it about Christians, or possibly even self-identified agnostics based on the three fake people's statements, but not about atheists. Not at all. Atheists are excluded from this universal description of humanity. We are a monolith, a repeating set of identical personalities with only the simplistic motivations and reasons that he chooses to assign to us all, with no room for variation. We lack this aspect of humanity. We don't have our own histories and our own minds and our own perspectives resulting from those histories. We don't even get to have sincere differences of opinion. We're just the enemy, and so it can't be acknowledged, even for a moment, that we might sincerely think we have a point. You have no business writing something like this. Go fuck yourself. Now we're on to the final section of this chapter, recognition of human laws. Armando lists out some things he thinks are evil: murder, rape, pedophilia, adultery, abortions, lying, stealing. Armando, lying and stealing are evil, according to you, right here, Armando. Lying, stealing. How did you write this list and then still publish this book, Armando? How does he justify his behavior to himself, honestly? Then he steals the definition of evil from the first Google definition, for some reason changing both the font and font size in the process, in service of a stock standard moral argument like I've responded to countless times in countless ways. I guess all I have to say about it is this. Armando wants it to be simple. He wants it to be easy. He wants reality itself to be on his side of moral thought, to have his back so he can at least feel like someone does. But he doesn't give any reason to think it actually is that way. He just says that it is, and that it must be. This section is pure wishful thinking for a less complicated world. It's funny because joining the army to go fight to impose his morality in foreign countries, which is what he claimed to want to do, shows exactly how morality actually works and always has.
There's a lot of things going on in this and outside of our country that is really, really bad, that I really want to involve myself in with providing some type of service. And while doing that, I want to be able to have the opportunity to freely go to these different countries and bring the gospel to them.
It's argued about, and if the argument fails, it's fought about, and eventually some group or other comes out on top for a time and keeps on rambling on about how their morality is the one true, beautiful, perfect, objective, undeniable morality of God, and the other side is pure demonic evil, until the same process repeats, inevitably, and some other group comes out on top and claims that no, it was those other guys who were pure demonic evil. We're the ones with the perfect, objective, godly morality. You know, sometimes I have just the tiniest bit of envy for people like Armando. People who are so simple-minded that they can actually believe that. Sometimes complexity and nuance are troublesome, difficult things to deal with. But when you actually care what's true and have the ability to see through the simplifications, there isn't a lot of choice. Now, I want to be clear, I have moral positions like everyone else. Some not worth wasting my breath on, some worth arguing over, some worth fighting over, and some worth killing and dying over. That's how valuable they are to me. But I'm not able to pretend that these are the result of some endorsement or demand made by reality itself. They're the product of what Armando was so hollowly talking about before. How everyone has their own set of reasons and experiences and motivations and information and their own story and perspective and feelings and thoughts and opinions. All of that and more is what shapes a human mind, including a human's moral positions. A lot of people who make the moral argument want to pretend that all of that deep, layered, infinitely branching, looping, stunningly complex human experience at the base of morality is trivial, worthless, empty. And it's not. It's at the root of what it is to be a person. The moral argument downplays and denigrates the core of our humanity for no reason other than to serve yet another trite God of the Gaps argument. It's like trading a golden, gem-studded goblet for a styrofoam cup. It's an ugly wretch of an argument. Too bad it's also one of the most popular. Anyway, this chapter just kind of ends after the moral argument. There's no conclusion, so I guess that's all there is for this round. Thanks for watching. Next time, Chapter 4. If you would, before you go, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. And if you like the channel, also please consider supporting. Just a couple bucks a month or per video if you like helps a huge amount. And enormous thanks to all of my supporters who've already made that choice. For early access, email list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.